Hello, my name is Jacob, and I'm a Norse Pagan, and today I'm in a cemetery in Munich, Germany. But I'm not here to talk about the dead, I'm not here to talk about the afterlife. I'm here hunting squirrels, because today we're talking about Ratatoskr, the squirrel of Norse myth. So why a graveyard, you might be asking? And I'm asking myself that same question because when I first came here, it was out of pure curiosity. I really just wanted to see an old graveyard. I mean, there's graves here going back, I think, to the 15th century. It's a really old place. And so when walking through here, we encountered a squirrel, a very peculiar squirrel, and it was a red squirrel. I've never seen a red squirrel. Now, obviously, they're not just unique to this place in the world, but as far as Munich, most of the squirrels here are black squirrels. And so to find a red squirrel specifically here, and the way it acted, it was really friendly and kind of came up to us, and definitely wanted something. And it was a weird kind of spiritual connection, and it was just kind of odd. In this very somber place, you find a bright, excitable, happy squirrel. And so I thought to myself, I have to come back here, and what better subject to talk about than Ratatoskr? I should also mention the reason I said the squirrel of Norse myth is because we don't really have anything to suggest that he's a religious component at all. So the reason I said Norse myth instead of, Norse paganism is because we really don't have any evidence at all to suggest that Ratatoskr, or really squirrels in general across the world, are worshipped in some form of reverence. They're usually just characters or mythological symbols. They're very rarely the subject of any kind of veneration or worship. So in this video, we're going to cover the information we have, of course, in the Poetic and Prose Edda. It's very little. And then I'm going to also share with you the worldview of squirrels, and then kind of bring that all together into what Ratatoskr means in the, the Norse mythos, and if it should mean anything to you as you walk this path in Norse paganism. All right, let us begin the hunt for a squirrel. See, it's really funny I said let us begin the hunt for a squirrel because I actually already found one. The moment I walked in here, previously when we were walking around, it took us until the very end to actually run into one. We didn't see one the whole time. Here was the first thing I saw, which I found very peculiar, just because, I'm here to film about Ratatoskr the squirrel, and sure enough, there he is. So I'm, of course, showing you this footage. I mean, I got some great footage already of the squirrel. And you can see that it's a very peculiar squirrel. You can see the mannerisms you see in squirrels all around the world, but it was very curious, like exceedingly curious from my experiences with squirrels. I brought some peanuts, which I did look and see that peanuts are okay for squirrels. They're unsalted. So I brought some peanuts to give to the squirrel to hopefully maybe get some better footage, because of course I can't talk about Ratatoskr without putting in footage of squirrels. So what do we have historically about Ratatoskr? What gives us any evidence to suggest he even exists? And quite frankly, this is the littlest amount of information I have ever shared in a video and had a whole subject around it. It is one stanza in the Poetic Edda and one sentence in the Prose Edda, and they're almost identical to one another. So the sentence in the Prose Edda reads as follows. A squirrel called Ratatoskr runs up and down through the ash, carrying malicious messages between the eagle and Nidhogg. And there you go, that's the entire lore we have about Ratatoskr. And I couldn't find any other sources, I couldn't find any archaeological evidence. We've never dug up a squirrel artifact, so there's really not much to go off of. And yet he still is a very prevalent force in any picturing of the world tree. I mean, you usually always see, of course, the tree, the snakes, the worms below, Nidhogg, and then the eagle at top, and then Ratatoskr running up and down between them. Really, the only other piece of evidence we can look at is the name itself, Ratatoskr or Ratatoskr. And what I was able to find and dig up is there's a bit of a debate what the name means, and I think it really comes from what the origin of the name is. Is it Old Norse? Is it Germanic? Is it Anglo-Saxon? So the three main names I have seen is Tusk the Traveler, or the Traveling Tusk, which is Rat and Tusker put together. But then I have also seen Rat Tooth as names as well. So I don't know what much you can dig from that as well. I saw like one long explanation talking about how it was Sawtooth because he gnaws through the world tree and the world tree is decaying and he is like gnawing at it. But again, there's a lot of theories out there, but really the only information you can take from is the name and that one line we have about him. So, I mean, you can create whatever theory you want as long as it applies to those names. So there's a bunch out there. And I'm going to share with you the 3 prevailing theories about what Ratatoskr is, at least within the Norse mythos. But first, I'm going to continue my hunt for the squirrel. I want you to picture this. You're walking through a cemetery when you see a strange American in an Indiana Jones style hat. And he's talking about a mythological squirrel and then is walking through the woods trying to find him. This is what people are seeing right now. So if you want to support me and the strange and yet hopefully wonderful content here at the Wisdom of Odin, please think about going down below to Patreon. It's the only way I'm able to do this full time, but most importantly, it's the only way I'm able to actually come up with ideas like this. So please go down below and think about donating there, and you may very well help me find this squirrel. All right, back to it. I swear, if you see one while I'm walking and talking to you, I'm gonna be so upset. But the 3 prevailing theories about Ratatoskr from what little information we have. One is that he is merely a facade, a decoration to storytelling. This is just a raw, he was mentioned once, therefore he is not that important kind of thing. And, I think you can argue that. You can see that he apparently wasn't that important because he was only mentioned one time, at least in the recorded histories that we have, and he is never mentioned nor referenced once after that. So, I mean, I can see where people come from that. The second prevailing theory is that he is a metaphorical symbol for basically agitation, that, taking on that aspect of the squirrel. That statue's got some creepy vibes. A dude, Joseph Knobel. He's holding like a woman? Maybe he was a sculptor or something? I don't know, it stopped me in my tracks when I walked by it. That was kind of weird. Anyway, so the second prevailing theory is the metaphorical. So he's the symbol of agitation or discourse between 2 groups because he is antagonizing the eagle and Nidhogg. So he is constantly spreading misinformation, he's spreading lies, slander, things like this. And so he was a symbol for a negative thing. So obviously not a very positive reaction. As the antagonizer, this is obviously from people's personal observations of squirrels. And this actually leads to the third prevailing theory, is that Ratatoskr is really just an observation of squirrels that was recorded down in the story. So it kind of goes with the first one, where it's really just a detail that people decided to add to the story of the world tree, and that it doesn't actually have any significant value, but it does kind of play in more into the observation of what squirrels mean. And then you can also dive deeper into the, squirrels as antagonizers, squirrels as, gatherers. So the aspects of a squirrel, at least in the natural world. So this third theory actually rolls quite nicely into the secondary research I did for this video, and that is looking at global squirrel mythology. Something I never thought I would be researching, but hey, it's a lot of fun, and I found very little. There is really 2 major references I could find, at least in my brief research. Maybe if I found a book on squirrel mythology, I would find more. From this secondary research, I could tell there are 2 major mythologies, belief systems that have squirrel mythology within them. One being the Celtic, which is, again, very small, but it seems like the goddess Medeb. I am so bad at Celtic pronunciations. I'm sure someone will correct me. Maybe it's Meeb or Medeb or Maine or something. I'm not sure. I'm so bad at Celtic. But I'll put up a reference image because I'm so sorry. But I could find that she had a squirrel companion in one source. And then I tried to dig deeper and find more sources where it mentions this squirrel companion, and I could find nothing. And so I have one internet source that says she had a squirrel companion, and that it warned her of danger. Other than that, I couldn't find anything else. But again, this is the breadcrumbs, this is the crumbs I'm scraping at to find information on squirrel mythology. The majority of squirrel mythology, besides Ratatoskr, which is very little, comes from the Native American tribes here in North America. And so there are several different prevailing theories, really all encompassing the entire idea of what a squirrel is. So there were several tribes that use the squirrel as their main animal, as their there are several tribes that use the squirrel as their tribal animal. There were also tribes that saw squirrels as antagonizers, much like Ratatoskr and the theories around him. Another aspect of the squirrel that seems to have been observed and venerated in some way by Native Americans is the idea that they prepare for things, that they have wisdom when it says, oh, winter is coming, they're going to stock up food. This is not something every animal does. In fact, it's a very rare trait. And so for the fact for them to actually have the mindset to be, okay, I'm going to prepare for something that's coming. They have the foresight, or at least the knowledge that something bad is coming and they have to prepare for it. And then the last aspect I was able to pick up from North American squirrel mythology is the fact that they did warn people. So this is something, of course, we saw in the Celtic as well, is that squirrels have a method and a system of warning one another and warning others that danger is coming. So this is another thing that is prized in a positive light. The reason I'm sharing this section and sharing world mythology is because that's kind of what we're left with. How has the world observed squirrels? What have other people groups taken from observing them? Because at the very least, we know that the northern spiritualities, the northern mythologies, recorded down at least one line of Ratatoskr, maybe more, and maybe some tribes never had a squirrel mythology at all. Again, we have to look at where are we getting this information from. We're getting it from the Poetic Edda. We really don't know where they got that source material, and it's from Iceland. So for all we know, people in Sweden didn't have a legend about Ratatoskr, or Norway or Denmark. Maybe this was only a thing in Iceland, although I'm not sure if there's squirrels in Iceland. I'm going to put this up as Jacob does research after the video, but again, this is another interesting thing, is if there's not squirrels in Iceland, then that's interesting that Iceland recorded about squirrels. So that means that mythology came from somewhere else. That's interesting. Yeah, hopefully there isn't squirrels in Iceland, because I think that's an interesting connection. So for them to actually have sat down and recorded and talked about squirrels in a mythology means that the information traveled with them. So all of this is really coming into my final point and my final thoughts. Of course, I have to always say, I'm not trying to convince you I have the right answer. I am merely sharing with you the information we have, both from scholars who have talked about this, from other mythologies that have squirrel mythology, and what source material we have. And now I want to share with you what I think about all of this. You can agree with me or disagree with me. That's why the comment section exists down below. Go down there, talk about what you think Ratatoskr means, share your ideas in a positive and enlightening way, which is all I'm trying to do on this channel. So now I'm going to share with you my thoughts on Ratatoskr and what he means to our world today. And hopefully I actually find a squirrel out here. I've been walking around this whole dang cemetery. I haven't seen a single one since the very beginning. I feel like I'm being messed with. Ratatoskr. So my final thoughts on Ratatoskr, the squirrel in Norse myth. From reflecting on it, looking at all the information that I was looking at for the first time, that I'm now sharing with you, I do think that the ancestors, so to speak, observed an antagonizing creature and wrote him into the mythology. Now, if I'm looking at it a big picture kind of way, what can he represent in this big idea, religious kind of way, or at least in a way that has some form of depth? And I look at the eagle at the top of the world tree, and then we look at Nidhogg. And if you see the world tree, as I do, which is a representation of the universe, representation of, the realms that we live on, do you actually see an eagle? No, I think the eagle represents nobility, it represents the good, it represents sovereignty, as eagles usually represent. And we also know that an eagle hangs above the door to Valhalla as well. So obviously this is a very, noble creature. And then we have the lowest of the low. I mean, you have the eagle at the top, and then the lowest of the low in the universe is the worms, the dragons, Nidhogg. And this is also where the lowest of the low go as well. The oath breakers, are eaten and devoured by Nidhogg constantly. And so you have a squirrel, a little squirrel, that runs up and down the universe, up and down the world tree, to the noblest of noble, all the way down to the foulest of foul. And it spreads insults between those two things. So in a way, I almost see Ratatoskr, the squirrel, as balance, as this transference of energy, as, something that maintains, it spreads lies, it spreads slander about the noblest of ideas and the foulest of ideas as well. In a way, I see it as a balancing force. you know, you have to think about this little squirrel going up to this eagle. Eagles eat squirrels. You look at worms, dragons, nidhogg. It's probably going to eat the squirrel as well. And yet it is not afraid to go up and down this world tree, antagonizing both of these beings. And it doesn't take any shit. I mean, Ratatoskr does not take shit when it comes to, you know, spreading these rumors, these slanders. And again, I guess it's up to you whether you see it as a good thing. If you see Ratatoskr as a positive force, I see him as a neutral force, a force of balance between the highest and the lowest. I mean, this is really looking in depth between one stanza in the Poetic Edda and one line in the Prose Edda. So this is a really in-depth look for so little information, but that is what I'm able to kind of pull out in a deeper way, in a real way. What I really think, again, that was the deeper look. You know, if you choose to look at it deeply, if I choose to look at it deeply, this is what I see. But what I actually think is a combination of all three elements of the, you know, the observations, the theories that I shared with you, is I do think that Ratatoskr is an antagonizer, that he does have some form of metaphorical value to the Poetic and Prose Edda, because most things do have some form of metaphor to them. You know, whether you look at that name, you know, Tusk the Traveler, or, you know, Sawtooth or Drilltooth or whatever it is, you know, you look at those elements and you think, okay, why did someone choose to first tell this orally? Why did an elder of a community or a tribe sit down in front of a fire to tell the other people there's a squirrel in the world tree? And I do think it's a combination of observation. When, you know, they were actually out in the woods and they saw squirrels, they observed what squirrels did. The ancestors are very observant. Mythologies and ancestries around the world obviously have observed the natural world to create the stories that they tell. This is something we see in the Native American mythologies, as they were observing squirrels and they took aspects of that and brought it into their mythology. So I think it's no different for the, you know, the tribes and the clans and the stories of the northern world. Is they observed their natural world, they saw squirrels on trees antagonizing, you know, squirrels will antagonize anybody. They'll antagonize an eagle, they'll antagonize a snake, they'll antagonize you. So they were sitting here, wow, that squirrel does not take any shit. And so they added that squirrel into their stories from their observations, because they were like, well, we're talking about an ash tree, a world tree. What exists in that tree? Okay, well, you have eagles nest at the top. You have snakes at the bottom, you know, and you have, like, you know, the worms, you have the, you know, the beings that are kind of lesser. And then you have this squirrel that exists in both worlds and is not afraid to antagonize both sides. So yes, I think that is honestly what I think, is that the ancestors observed squirrels, and when they came around a fire to tell the story of the universe, they added squirrels to it as a facade, as a way to build depth to this story. But they actually brought in their observations, and I think through those observations you can dig out some depth. I hope that makes sense, and I really do want to hear your thoughts. This is not something that, you know, I am, you know, dead set on. This is just something that I've observed, both from being out here and, you know, looking into this research. So I want to know your thoughts down below, what you think Ratatoskr means. And if you agree with any of these theories that I shared, and of course my theory myself, which is kind of a combination of all of them. But the last thing I will really leave this on, because I'm getting close here to the end and I'll probably end up running into a squirrel as I'm done filming, but you know, my experience out here, the reason I came back to this graveyard is because I did have a natural connection. I did have something that happened when I witnessed this squirrel that does seem to be quite mischievous while I'm out here. And I'm not going to say it's like a God presence. I'm not like, ooh, I need to come back here and venerate a squirrel. That's not really what I'm saying. You know, what I'm saying is that through this observation of the natural world here today, yes, we know the science behind squirrels. I can look up a biology book behind squirrels, but there still is this spiritual presence behind them that I think the ancestors noticed as well. So, you know, like when I went back there, this place I saw the squirrel for the first time, I actually did leave a small amount of peanuts, just, you know, as an offering, so to speak. But again, I'm not expecting a godlike presence like you would Odin or Thor. It's more of it's a respect and veneration of nature that is at its core one of the main principles of Northern spirituality as a whole. Well, I have officially come full circle in my journeys. I've returned to where I first saw the squirrel when I first got here, and he has actually eaten at least one of the peanuts, or someone came by and ate a peanut off a gravestone. I hope that's not the case otherwise. I don't really, that's weird. But thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I know it's been kind of a whirlwind as far as like information, but I really just wanted to be a fun one where I tramps around a graveyard, sharing with you stories of the Norse myths about a squirrel that travels up and down the world tree, antagonizing the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. So thank you so much for joining me for this video, and until next time, and until the hall, Skull.